Picture this. Your grandparents could turn a few hours of October work into 6 months of fresh food. No fertilizers, no fancy gadgets, just dirt, timing, and tricks so simple they sound like cheating. Today's gardeners spend hundreds on amendments and still can't match what the old folks grew with kitchen scraps and wood ash. What did they know that we've forgotten? I'm about to show you 20 autumn secrets that made their gardens legendary. And number 5, it'll make you rethink everything you thought you knew about tomatoes. Let's dig in. Bury kitchen scraps right in the garden. There's something deeply satisfying about taking your coffee grounds, vegetable peelings, and eggshells, walking out to the garden, and burying them right where next year's tomatoes will grow. This wasn't laziness or a shortcut. It was strategic soil building that our grandparents perfected over generations. In autumn, after the harvest was complete, they'd dig shallow trenches between rows or at the ends of beds and dump kitchen scraps directly into the soil. This method, sometimes called trench composting, puts organic matter exactly where it was needed without the hassle of maintaining a separate compost pile. Through the winter months, these buried scraps would break down slowly, feeding soil microbes and enriching the earth with nutrients that would be perfectly available come spring planting. The process was remarkably efficient. No turning, no monitoring moisture levels, no worrying about the right carbon to nitrogen ratio. The soil itself did all the work. Speaking of garden, the next 2 tricks are worth absolutely trying. Let chickens loose in the garden. Once the final harvest was complete, many grandparents would open the garden gate and release their chickens into what had been carefully tended beds all summer. Chickens are incredibly efficient garden workers when deployed at the right time. They'd scratch through the soil looking for bugs, grubs, and weed seeds, reducing pest populations before insects could settle in for winter. Their scratching also incorporated surface debris and any remaining plant matter into the topsoil, effectively tilling the beds without mechanical equipment. As they worked, they'd deposit nitrogen-rich manure, adding fertility exactly where it was needed. The chicken-powered autumn cleanup reduced disease pressure too, as the birds would consume spores and diseased plant tissue that might otherwise overwinter. Grandparents knew to limit the chickens' time in the garden. Too long, and they'd compact the soil or create dusty bare patches. A few weeks of supervised foraging in late October was perfect. Cover the garden beds with leaves. While neighbors raked leaves to the curb, our grandparents were piling them onto their garden beds during autumn, creating a protective blanket that would work wonders through the winter. This practice served multiple purposes. The leaf layer protected soil from erosion, preventing precious topsoil from washing away during autumn rains and spring thaws. It insulated the ground, moderating temperature swings that could harm beneficial soil organisms and overwintering crops. As the leaves slowly decomposed, they added organic matter and nutrients, particularly carbon, creating the perfect environment for earthworms and beneficial microbes. Come spring, the partially decomposed leaves could be turned into the soil or pushed aside for planting, enriching the earth. Grandparents knew which leaves worked best. Oak leaves were slow to decompose and slightly acidic, perfect for blueberries and azaleas. Maple leaves broke down faster and were better for vegetable beds. They'd avoid walnut leaves containing juglone, which could inhibit plant growth. Use ashes from the wood stove. In an era when wood stoves heated homes and cooked meals, ashes accumulated constantly, and grandparents found uses for every bucketful. The autumn garden, particularly beds being prepared for winter, received generous applications of wood ash, a practice that seems odd until you understand the chemistry and pest control benefits at work. Wood ash is rich in potassium, an essential nutrient that promotes strong root development and disease resistance. It also contains calcium, magnesium, and trace minerals. But perhaps more importantly for autumn application, ash raises soil pH, counteracting the acidity that can build up from decomposing organic matter. grandparents would sprinkle ash around the bases of fruit trees and berry bushes in fall, providing nutrients that would slowly leach into the root zone over winter. The ash also had pest-deterring properties. The timing of autumn application was important because it gave the ash months to integrate into the soil before spring planting. Too much ash applied in spring could shock tender seedlings, but fall application allowed winter rains to mellow its effects. Harvest green tomatoes and hang the whole vine indoors. As the first frost warning arrived, know what most grandparents did? They head to the tomato patch with a different goal than usual. Instead of picking individual tomatoes, they'd cut entire vines at the base, haul them indoors, and hang them upside down in the basement, attic, or back room. Crazy, right? But this technique extended the tomato harvest by weeks or even months. The genius was in understanding how tomatoes ripen. They don't need to be on the plant to complete the process. They need only warmth and time. By taking the whole vine, grandparents ensured that tomatoes could continue drawing nutrients from the foliage and stems as they ripened, resulting in better flavor than tomatoes picked individually and ripened in a basket. The upside-down hanging kept fruits off surfaces where they might rot, while good air circulation prevented mold. Green tomatoes would slowly turn orange, then red, providing fresh tomatoes well into November or December. The smallest, greenest ones might never fully ripen, but they'd be used for green tomato relish or fried. To keep it safe, grandparents would check the hanging vines regularly, removing any that showed signs of rot before they could spread problems to neighbors. Plant garlic. Before Halloween, does the phrase, "plant on a cold night for a hot harvest," ring a bell? If yes, you're a natural. If no, don't worry. Here's the backstory. The reason for planting garlic before Halloween was both practical and traditional. Garlic cloves need a period of cold to develop properly, and planting in late October gave them time to establish roots before the ground froze completely. The cold night timing ensured cloves wouldn't sprout prematurely. If planted too early in warm soil, green shoots might emerge and get killed by later frosts. The Halloween deadline was a memory trick, an easy date to remember that happened to coincide perfectly with optimal planting time across much of the country. Each clove went in pointy end up, 3 inches deep, 6 inches apart. A layer of mulch went on top, and then the garlic was ignored until the following summer. This set it and forget it approach produced consistently large, flavorful bulbs that stored through the entire following year. Save seeds from the hardiest plants. Walk through the garden in late October after several hard frosts have knocked down the weaker plants, and you'll notice something interesting. A few specimens are still standing, strong, green, and vigorous despite the cold. These were the plants our grandparents watched most carefully because these were the ones whose seeds they'd save. This simple selection process was practical plant breeding at its finest. By consistently saving seeds only from plants that survived the earliest frosts, handled drought best, or resisted local pests, they gradually created varieties perfectly adapted to their specific gardens. A tomato plant that kept producing while its neighbors succumbed to disease? Those seeds were added to next year's starting mix. Lettuce that didn't bolt during a hot spell? Saved. Beans that germinated in cool soil and matured before the first frost? Absolutely saved. Over decades, this practice resulted in landrace varieties uniquely suited to local conditions. Seeds that couldn't be bought from any catalog because they existed nowhere else. Dig deep and bury manure in fall. This was backbreaking work, the kind that makes modern gardeners grateful for tillers and amendments in bags. But our grandparents would spend autumn afternoons digging trenches 2 feet deep, filling them with animal manure and covering everything back up. The effort paid off with spectacularly productive gardens the following summer. The genius was in the timing. Fresh manure is too hot to use immediately. Its high nitrogen content and ammonia can burn plants. But buried in autumn, manure had all winter to break down, mellowing into a perfectly balanced fertilizer ready for spring planting. The deep burial served another purpose. It put nutrients below the root zone of most weeds, making them available only to vegetables with deeper roots. As winter rains and snowmelt percolated through the soil, they'd carry dissolved nutrients downward, creating a reservoir of fertility that plants would tap into as they grew. This deep feeding method worked exceptionally well for heavy feeders like tomatoes, squash, and corn. The buried manure would sustain these crops all season without additional fertilizing. Store pumpkins on straw, not concrete. Grandparents knew that how you stored pumpkins was just as important as growing them properly. The rule was simple but critical. Never store pumpkins directly on concrete or hard surfaces. Instead, they'd create a layer of clean, dry straw or use wooden pallets, setting each pumpkin on this cushioned surface with space between fruits. The reasoning was practical and based on hard-won experience. Concrete, being cold and slightly damp, drew moisture from the pumpkin's underside, creating the perfect conditions for rot to start. The spot where pumpkin met concrete would develop a soft, discolored area that would spread and eventually ruin the entire fruit. Straw or wood provided insulation and air circulation, keeping the skin dry and firm. Grandparents also knew to store only perfect pumpkins. Any with cuts, bruises, or soft spots went directly to cooking or animal feed. Damaged pumpkins wouldn't last, and rot could spread to neighboring fruits. Dry herbs in the attic or barn rafters. As autumn progressed and herbs in the garden began to fade, grandparents would make their final harvests, gathering armfuls of sage, thyme, oregano, and countless other plants for preservation. The attic and barn weren't chosen randomly. These spaces offered consistent conditions perfect for drying, warm, dark, and with good air circulation. Direct sunlight would fade colors and destroy essential oils, while damp basements would promote mold. The rafters provided convenient hanging spots and kept herbs out of the way during daily activities. Grandparents would tie small bunches with twine loose enough for air circulation, but tight enough to hold as stems shrank during drying. Timing the harvest was crucial. Herbs needed to be picked after morning dew dried, but before the day's heat evaporated their essential oils. Once completely dry, usually after 2 to 3 weeks, the herbs were stripped from stems and stored in glass jars away from light. These preserved flavors and medicines sustained families through winter. Pull carrots and beets, then bury them in sand root cellars weren't optional luxuries for our grandparents. They were essential infrastructure, and knowing how to store root vegetables properly meant the difference between eating well all winter and running out of food by February. After the first few frosts had sweetened the roots in late autumn, grandparents would carefully dig their carrots and beets. After brushing off excess dirt, they'd twist off the tops, leaving about an inch of stem to prevent bleeding. Then came the sand burial. In wooden boxes or barrels in the root cellar, they'd layer roots in damp sand, making sure no two vegetables touched. The sand maintained perfect humidity, preventing shriveling while not being wet enough to promote rot. Stored this way, carrots and beets would remain crisp and fresh until spring, sometimes lasting 6 months or more. The darkness of the cellar prevented sprouting, while the cool temperature slowed respiration and aging. The technique of burying carrots and beets in sand was pure preservation genius. Plant clover or winter rye as a cover crop. As summer crops were pulled and beds emptied, our grandparents didn't leave soil bare. They planted cover crops, usually winter rye or crimson clover, transforming empty garden plots into living green carpets for winter. This practice was sophisticated soil management disguised as simple planting. Winter rye sent roots deep into the ground, breaking up compacted soil and pulling nutrients from depths vegetables couldn't reach. When turned under in spring, those roots added organic matter throughout the soil profile. Crimson clover, being a legume, went further. It actually manufactured nitrogen from the air, fixing it in the soil for next season's crops. The living plants prevented erosion during autumn rains and spring snowmelt, their roots holding precious topsoil in place. They suppressed weeds by occupying space that unwanted plants would otherwise colonize. Come spring, turning under these cover crops added enormous amounts of organic matter, creating the fluffy, rich soil that vegetables loved. Leave the stalks of corn. Standing after harvesting corn in autumn, the next logical step seems to be cutting down the dried stalks and clearing the field. But our grandparents often did the opposite. They left corn stalks standing through winter, and here's why. Standing corn stalks acted as natural snow fences, catching and holding snow in the garden rather than letting it blow away. This trapped snow provided crucial winter moisture and insulation for soil and any overwintering plants. As the snow slowly melted, it percolated deep into the ground, recharging moisture levels that summer had depleted. The standing stalks also created windbreaks, protecting smaller crops or garden structures from harsh winter winds that could desiccate plants and damage soil structure. Some grandparents would plant hardy greens in the protection of standing corn, creating microclimates where vegetables could survive temperatures that would kill them in exposed locations. Use old burlap sacks to wrap young trees. Late autumn meant preparing the orchard for winter, and one of the most important tasks was protecting young fruit trees from the harsh conditions ahead. The solution was simple and elegant. Old burlap sacks wrapped around trunks, secured with twine, providing armor against multiple winter threats. These wraps prevented frost cracks, which occurred when sunny winter days warmed tree bark, causing it to expand, followed by rapid freezing at night that caused contraction. This cycle could split bark, creating wounds that invited disease and insect pests. The burlap moderated temperature swings, keeping bark more consistent. It also prevented winter burn, a condition where frozen cells in the bark were damaged by bright winter sun. Young trees with thin bark were especially vulnerable. The wraps deterred rabbits, mice, and deer from gnawing bark, a major cause of young tree death in winter when other food sources were scarce. This simple autumn task could determine whether a young orchard thrived or failed, making it one of the most important pre-winter preparations. Turn compost one, last time before frost. To our grandparents, the last major task before the cold set in was giving the pile one final, thorough turning, a process that set the stage for winter composting success. This final turn had multiple objectives. It mixed partially decomposed materials from the pile's exterior with fresher materials from the core, ensuring more uniform decomposition. It introduced oxygen deep into the pile, feeding the aerobic bacteria that did the bulk of the decomposition work. Most importantly, it generated heat. A well-turned compost pile in autumn could reach internal temperatures of 140 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to continue breaking down materials even as air temperatures dropped below freezing. This heat was valuable. It killed weed seeds and plant pathogens, creating cleaner compost for spring. The insulating effect of the pile size meant the core would stay active for weeks or even months after turning, processing kitchen scraps and garden waste through early winter. Spread lime on the soil. Before winter lime serves two primary functions. First, it raises soil pH, counteracting the acidity developed from decomposing organic matter and certain fertilizers. Most vegetables prefer slightly acidic to neutral pH, and fall liming ensured the soil would be in the right range come spring. Second, lime provided calcium, an essential nutrient for strong cell walls and disease resistance. The timing of fall application was crucial. Lime works slowly, taking months to react with soil and alter pH fully. Applying it in autumn gave it all winter to integrate, meaning the soil would be conditioned adequately for spring planting. Fall application also reduced the risk of burning plants. Fresh lime can be harsh on roots, but winter rains and freeze-thaw cycles mellowed its effects. Grandparents knew that lime also had pest management benefits. It created conditions inhospitable to certain overwintering pests and disease organisms. Over the years, this attention to soil pH created gardens with consistently healthy, productive plants. Leave parsnips and kale in the ground. While most of the garden was harvested by late October, certain crops were deliberately left behind, standing in frozen soil through the entire winter. This was a sophisticated understanding of how cold affects certain vegetables, actually improving their quality. Parsnips were the star of this practice. These root vegetables, tough and woody when harvested in autumn, transformed into sweet, almost nutty delicacies after exposure to repeated freezing and thawing. The cold converted starches into sugars, a natural antifreeze that protected the plant's cells while dramatically improving flavor. Grandparents would mark the rows with tall stakes so they could find them under snow, then dig parsnips as needed through winter and early spring. Each harvest was an event, thawing the ground enough to dig, pulling up roots that had survived months of freezing, brushing off soil to reveal pale, sweet flesh. Kale operated on similar principles. Frost broke down bitter compounds in the leaves, making them sweeter and more tender. Collect rainwater in barrels before freeze. As autumn progressed toward winter, water management became crucial. Our grandparents would fill every available barrel, bucket, and container with rainwater before the first hard freeze, creating a reserve that would serve multiple purposes through the cold months ahead. This wasn't primarily about garden watering, though that was part of it. Collected rainwater was used for livestock, particularly chickens and other small animals that needed water daily but couldn't break ice from outdoor sources. It was used for household tasks where well water wasn't necessary. Most importantly, it was available. In harsh winters, hauling water from wells or pumps could be exhausting work, particularly for elderly family members or during ice storms. Having barrels of water available near the house and barn reduced this labor significantly. The barrels were positioned strategically, under downspouts, near doorways, anywhere that made filling them easy during autumn rains. Once full, they'd add a layer of straw or leaves on top to slow freezing, though they knew the water would eventually freeze solid. So, some grandparents would deliberately underfill barrels, knowing that water expands when frozen, and overfilled containers would crack. Bless or rest the garden. After the last harvest, after the final pumpkin was pulled, the last herb harvested, and all the autumn tasks completed, many grandparents performed a simple ritual that modern gardeners have entirely forgotten. They'd stand at the garden's edge, often at sunset, and offer thanks for the season's bounty, asking blessings for the soil's rest and renewal over winter. This wasn't necessarily religious, though it could be. It was an acknowledgement of the relationship between gardener and land, recognition that the soil had given generously and now needed to rest. Some would speak aloud, thanking the earth for its gifts and promising to care for it in return. Others would simply stand in silence, reflecting on the season past and the one to come. A few families had specific traditions, scattering the last handful of seeds as an offering, pouring a cup of water on the center of the garden, or leaving a small token, a coin or special stone, buried where the first seeds of spring would go. This practice grounded people in cycles larger than themselves, connecting them to generations past who had worked the same soil. Sharpen and oil tools. Before storing, the last warm days of autumn were for tool maintenance, a ritual our grandparents performed with almost religious dedication. Every hoe, spade, pruner and blade was cleaned, sharpened, and oiled before being put away for winter, ensuring they'd be ready for immediate use come spring. Metal left dirty over winter would rust, particularly in damp cellars or sheds. A winter's worth of rust could ruin cutting edges, making tools nearly useless come spring. Wooden handles left wet would crack and split through freeze-thaw cycles. The maintenance process was thorough. Tools were scraped clean of all soil and plant matter. Metal parts were sharpened with files or whetstones, restoring keen edges. Everything was wiped down with oily rags, creating a protective coating against moisture. Wooden handles were checked for cracks and treated with linseed oil, which would soak in and preserve the wood. Tools were then stored in dry locations, often hung on walls where air could circulate around them. These 20 autumn tricks represent generations of accumulated wisdom, practical knowledge refined through decades of trial, error, and observation. Our grandparents didn't have agricultural extension offices or internet forums. They had experience, passed down knowledge, and a willingness to work with natural cycles rather than against them. Which of these forgotten tricks will you try this autumn? Do you have garden traditions from your own family that deserve to be remembered? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to give this video a hype.